Tenant improvements are improvements made to a leased property to meet the needs of the occupying tenant. Thus, you will generally hear of tenant improvements in the context of commercial property, as commercial tenants frequently need to adapt a rented property to fulfill its specific business needs. But what happens to the specialized improvements after the commercial tenant vacates? Well, how about an example? Consider a retail business owner who enters into a commercial lease agreement to occupy a commercial space as a tenant. The lease premises does not contain any tenant improvements whatsoever. It's basically a blank canvas. The tenant agrees to make all the tenant improvements needed to occupy the premises and operate a retail business. The lease agreement provides for the property to be delivered to the landlord on expiration of the lease in the condition the tenant received it, less normal wear and tear. Improperly, there is no provision which addresses whether tenant improvements will remain with the property or whether the property is to be restored by the tenant to its original condition. Without clarity regarding the proper handling of costly improvements, an ambiguity exists. On expiration of the lease, the tenant strips the premises of all the tenant improvements they placed on the property and vacates. The building is returned to the landlord in the condition it was found by the tenant, an empty shell, less wear and tear. To relet the space, the landlord replaces nearly all the tenant improvements they removed. Is the tenant liable for the landlord's cost to replace the tenant improvements removed by the tenant on vacating? Yes. Improvements made by a tenant that are permanently affixed to real estate become part of the real estate to which they are attached. Permanent improvements remain with the property on expiration of the tenancy unless the lease agreement provides for the tenant to restore the property to its original condition by removing the improvements. Thus, the landlord's right to improvements added to the property and paid for by the tenant depend on whether the tenant improvements are built-in and permanent or freestanding and temporary, and whether the lease agreement requires the tenant to remove improvements and restore the premises. Examples of improvements that become part of the real estate include built-ins such as central air conditioning and heating, cabinets and stairwells, fixtures such as electrical and plumbing elements, walls, doors and drop ceilings, and attached flooring including carpeting, tile, and rolled vinyl. Now, improvements attached to the building become part of the real estate, but there are exceptions, big exceptions. Improvements that are unique to the operation of the tenant's business are called trade fixtures. Trade fixtures are retained by the tenant on expiration of the lease. They're also known as trade improvements. For example, think of shelving or display racks hung in a clothing store. We'll dig a little deeper into the concept of trade fixtures in a later section.